me, so I'm still sort of nibbling on mine. I apologize.
So is Rebecca. So, Rebecca, you have to introduce yourself. Hi, this is Mount Greylock High School. This is our webinar or our Hangout series. This is a multi-part series that concerns how digital media shapes our world and how we shape our world with digital media. We'll be asking a series of questions. What is learning in a networked society? How are ideas such as education, communication, community, activism, and civics influenced in digitally connected worlds? This series hosts a conversation with Mount Greylock students, which you see right there in the main screen, and then also usually some teachers and some other notable thinkers in the field of digital media and learning. The first one was Ethan Zuckerman, the director of the MIT Center for Media and Civics. The second was Chris Lehmann, the founder of Science Leadership Academy and EduCon, which is a really cool conference I think that Elyse and I have both been to. And then the third, and the building up to the best, is, or whatever, is Elyse Eidman-Aadahl. She was the director of the National Writing Project. And this Mount Greylock DML Lab speaker series is made possible by an award by the Olmsted Endowment, which is out of Williams College. So today, as I mentioned, we have a bunch of students. They'll introduce themselves in just a second. And then we have Elyse, and she's the director of the National Programs and Site Development at the National Writing Project in Berkeley. She's the founder of Digital Is, and I think she'll probably talk to us a little bit about that, which is part of the Digital Media and Learning Initiative sponsored by the MacArthur Foundation. So first, let's introduce the students, and then Rebecca, who's one of the professor's teachers here at Mount Greylock, and then I'll jump into some questions, okay? How about Miranda?
I'm Miranda.
I'm Anya.
I'm Molly.
I'm Hannah.
You go ahead. Go ahead. All right. I'm Noah. I'm Roy.
I'm Dan.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
And we have Rebecca Tucker-Smith, who's an English teacher here. She can speak for herself.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I've had the pleasure of teaching many, but not quite all of the lovely students in that room.
Excellent.
And can I ask, I know you're going to want me to probably do an introduction or something, but you introduced me. I'm just curious, like, what grades do we have represented with the students?
Well, we're all sophomores.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I'm a junior.
I'm in 9th grade.
Okay, great span.
Yep.
Great. So, as I said before, that we'll be exploring kind of a number of kind of broad topics, but writing and thinking and communicating in a digitally networked space. But I think it's a really especially important topic, not only because the DML lab here at Mount Greylock was created because of the needs that are arising from how technology and learning are kind of mixing together, and but also, so there are a number of industries that are changing, and learning and education is changing as a result of digital media. And what does this mean for the act of writing? That's kind of the specific topic today. And what does this mean for learning and teaching with writing? So I think the best place for us to start, Elyse, is actually for you to tell us a little bit about what the National Writing Project is, because I suspect these guys don't fully know. And then maybe there's a way to segue and transition into what Digital is.
Okay. So the National Writing Project is a networked organization. It's about 40 years old, so it actually was a network of local sites before network meant internet network and sites meant websites. When all those things got created during the 40 years, we had to keep explaining to people, no, actually it's a local site, not a site on the web. And that's something we can come back to in a minute. That change in the last 40 years in the digital culture is huge. But we're a networked organization of local writing projects that are all at campuses across the country. A couple of them are abroad. They're anchored at universities. And they're actually places where teachers primarily go, K through 12 teachers, university professors, and some librarians and out-of-school time folks who go to think about their teaching together and especially think about what it means to be a teacher, where what you really want to have happen is for your students to be creators. So if you take our name from 40 years ago, that we've still kept the National Writing Project, it's really about how can we create education where everyone can be a writer. And now we might say also everyone can be a maker, a creator, a producer. So if you're the teacher, what do you do to help people become better creators and innovators their whole life? So teachers have to get together and talk about that kind of thing and figure it out, especially since we're often in places like schools that really weren't built for that purpose, but were built for some other purposes. So how do we become better teachers with that in mind? So that's really what the Writing Project is.
And so the Digital A's project, how does that fit into the National Writing Project?
So, all right, so we started 40 years ago. And actually, just because this might amaze some people, not old people like me, but some people, we have an archive project that we're doing here at the National Writing Project, trying to get some of our historical stuff together. And somebody just came by to give us some piles of books like these. Now, probably on the web, folks can't see them, but let me tell you a little bit about this. These will look familiar to other people. So back in, this would be, what, 1978, teachers writing about how to use models to teach writing, so teachers trying to share what they're doing. So basically what they did was type up a lot of papers. You won't be able to probably see this, but these are all typewriter written pieces of paper. Run them off on a printer, 8.5 by 11, fold them over, put a cover, and you have a book. And that's what we were doing to share things. We would meet together face to face, but if you wanted to share your ideas about teaching farther away when you couldn't meet with people in the same room, of course you would write about stuff. And if you wanted to get published in like a professional book, only a tiny, tiny, tiny number of people would get published in a professional book. So if you wanted to publish yourself, you did something like this. This is called a chapbook because of the size of it. And chapbooks are famous, like poets and other people would write books and publish them this way, people who couldn't get published professionally. So when these got dropped off in the office, like about a week ago, because we had this archive project, somebody had this in their file drawers. And we opened it up, and oh my God, we saw these are actually typewriters that typed these pages. You would have to be actually really old like me to remember what that was like, because you make a mistake. Like you type this whole page, you make a mistake down here, and then you had to get the white out, or you had to get whatever. You had to try and get rid of your mistake. Maybe you had to retype the whole page. We did all our school papers that way. We did our master's theses and that kind of thing this way, and we published books this way. So we thought this was the greatest thing in the world at the time because people could publish themselves. But it was really a pain. And when computers came along and word processors came along and made this whole process so much easier so that you could just word process. I mean, my gosh, you all should actually try this on a typewriter just so that you can realize sort of the amazing technology you've grown up with. That you could sit there and add, delete, change, and edit right there on the screen, and then print out a fresh copy. You could keep revising and revising and revising. So that was the coolest thing in the world. And we got these other books. These are only a couple years later. You can see that they're a lot prettier. The covers are desktop published. The type inside is now not a typewriter, it's desktop publishing. This is probably from, let's see what the year is. This is going to be a little bit later, maybe into the 80s. So that was a huge step forward. But you still had to make a book, and you still had to go to the post office, you still had to send them out, you had to carry big boxes, you had to do all that kind of stuff. Then we get to the 90s. Here comes the World Wide Web. So the internet exists from, like, depending on where you want to count the start, the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. But the only people who used the internet really were scientists and scholars and military folks, created by DARPA for the military, to send data back and forth to each other. But we get to the early 90s, and then this thing gets created, which is a web browser, which is only in the early 1990s. It would let you actually not see data on the web, but see something that looked like a page, like you could read it without being a scientist. That was extraordinary. Was Mosaic, the first website. That was awesome. And that first web browser, rather. So then in the middle of the 90s, we realized we don't even have to make these books. We could make a web page or a website or a blog, a blog, and everybody could publish their writing to everybody else. It was the most amazing thing in the world. So this thing that we laboriously created, thinking we were way cool, all of a sudden we can do it like with almost no cost. No one has to buy paper. No one has to go to the post office. Now you can kick these things up on the web so easily, so educators can publish their stuff, but actually everyone can, including young people. Anybody. Actually, you all are at as freshmen, sophomores, juniors, etc. You know, you're way beyond. You're like 3-year-old little brothers and sisters can actually get on the iPad or the iPhone and take a picture and post it to the web. So you could be a baby and you could be publishing on the web now. So this, in my lifetime, is all new. For you, it's just the world that you're growing up with, which is both an amazing thing for you all, but whether you realize or not what an incredible advance it is kind of a different thing. So digital is an effort that a lot of educators like me had to make, because we grew up and we lived in schools and worked in schools and became students ourselves in an environment where none of that was true. So we all had to go to the library to do our research as academics, get in the car, go to the library. That is not always bad, and I still love libraries, but we had to go to a library. Now everything on the library comes to us. Or you just had to deal with the books that were there. Now we can almost search anything. Of course, we went to the library, and the books that were there probably went through an editor, and they probably got vetted a little bit. We knew they had some credibility. Now you all can find anything on the web, pretty much. Some of it might be really, really bad stuff, though. And I don't mean just bad in terms of, disturbing, but also not credible. Fake stuff on the web all over the place, because it hasn't been through a librarian and an editor and that kind of thing. So a lot of ways that we learned how to do academic research and be students, and what we always had to teach young people, all of that changed. So digital is a new publishing effort and a community of teachers that are trying to rethink what we should teach and what you should learn, so that in this world we live, a world where digital is the way we read, write, think, and research today. What's the new way that we all have to learn to be citizens and producers and engage people in a world where digital just is? Not that it's coming, it's actually here. So that's what digital is.
So as a follow-up, you have a national network of people. You have digitally global network of people that you're tapping. Are you seeing interesting student work that is leveraging these digital texts in either strictly academic realms or other realms? Can you share with us some of the really exciting projects that you've probably stumbled across on a weekly, daily basis?
Let me talk about a couple of things that I see folks doing, and I'll focus on the writers, especially the young people that are doing writing. What are the kinds of projects that they're doing? So one thing I want to say is a lot of the stuff that all the tools we use, all of you included, they're so new that we have to learn what we can possibly do with them, sometimes before we put them to really intense purposes. So I think there's a lot of room for playfulness and seeing, kind of playing on the web, making funny things or whatever, or enjoying things socially, that lets you learn a little bit about what you can do on the web that you then can do for serious purposes. So since you had Ethan Zuckerman on earlier, who's also a friend of mine too, one of the things, for example, I don't know if he talked about this, but there's a lot of things that that happen on the web that people are now putting to really political uses, as well as kind of fun uses. So, for example, remixing a commercial to actually make a political point, or making a GIF So a GIF is usually funny, it's usually silly, or a meme is usually funny or silly. So you've maybe made some of those yourself as you've been playing around. You could make a pretty serious statement or commentary on current events using those same tools. So one thing that I see is people doing kind of exploring fun things that work their way around that we just use playfully on the web, and then trying to put them to a serious purpose. So that would be one. Second thing that I see a lot of, I see a lot of people trying to take on, for example, young people taking on interesting social issues and trying to put their voice out about what's happening, their perspective, where they live, their age, doing some research on a social issue that otherwise people think is getting ignored, and building a blog or a set of resources. So, for example, here in Oakland is the community next door. We have a senior project requirement in Oakland. I don't know if you have a senior project kind of thing at Mount Greylock, but here Oakland students are supposed to do a senior project. And you kind of start thinking about it as a freshman, and as you go through the years 9 through 12, you might be doing a little bit of research on it and building up your knowledge base. And then by the time you're a senior, you might be building something on the web, making a website, or making an app that that does something with data to help people, or gives information to a community, or displays municipal information. So, for example, here a lot of young people are really interested in things connected to food justice. We're obsessed with eating, is our thing out here in California. We're very food obsessed on the one hand, but that means that a lot of people are interested in things like food deserts. I don't know if you've heard that term, but that's where in a community, for example, in low-income areas of a community, maybe you can't really get fresh food. All the food in your corner store, maybe mostly the stores around are, let's say, liquor stores or something like that.
Or junk food, yeah.
Or some 7-Elevens or whatever. All the food is processed. So the kind of healthy food that you might want to eat, if you're in a low income, a poverty area, it might be too hard to get to those grocery stores. So you're like living in a food desert. So one senior project here was a group of kids who mapped where the food deserts were and built a website around healthy eating habits, and then built other kinds of things to show communities where they could get better food. And other young people went and talked to like the people at those grocery stores, et cetera, to encourage them to have some fresh produce. So they might have been making, let's say, PowerPoints that they could use in a meeting with people who owned grocery stores about why they should have fresh food in the grocery. So all those kinds of things, you know, whether it's making a PowerPoint, whether it's building a website, or looking at municipal data to find out what the income areas are in different areas in Oakland. So you could use a mapping tool then, like Google Maps, to build a map about where good grocery stores were and where poor grocery stores were. Those are all digital tools and things that, all things that people could do, young people can do now that actually a couple generations ago would have been really, really hard to do. But now you can do them pretty easily with these digital tools. How are those? Are those the kinds of examples, Richard, you were thinking?
Yeah, definitely. So I was wondering if you guys have any questions at this juncture.
Yeah, they've been sitting there waiting, and I bet they have a lot to say. And I just lost you all. Where are you? Come back here. I'm sorry, I hit something and, okay. And your window disappeared and you're back. Okay, good. I'd love to hear what you all are working on too. What are some of your projects that you might be doing?
I guess I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, does the examples you just listed of the senior projects and people doing things with food mapping and things like that, does that fall under the umbrella of your organization, or were those just examples of how digital media is increasingly prevalent?
Oh, I see. Okay, so
of the National Writing
Project, yeah. So they are certainly examples of how digital media is increasingly prevalent. They're things that students did because their teachers were in the National Writing Project. So it's the kind of thing where their teachers thinking together, like Reading Digital is as a blog, as a website, or meeting together to say, wow, how can we put these tools in the hands of all of us to do stuff? They came up with ideas, then they worked with their classes, and then the students did that work. So it is kind of connected to the organization, but it's what they were doing as teachers when they went back and rethought their curriculum.
Oh, so it has a lot to do with technique of teaching.
Yeah.
Physical material.
Yeah, and actually technique, and then also probably curriculum too. So, for example, if you were some of those teachers are, for example, 12 government teachers. So, I don't know if you have government classes at Mount Greylock, but in your social studies, probably at some point you went through like how a bill becomes a law, three branches of government, blah, blah, blah. So classic civics courses are very much oriented toward how does government work. That would be one thing, 3 branches, petitions, bills, laws. How does government work, and what you need to know to be a thoughtful voter. Okay, so there you are until you're 18. You're in school. You're learning all that stuff. Then you become 18, and then you're supposed to go vote, which is like this pretty minimal thing when you think about it. Every now and then there's an election and you vote. Now, I'm on TV right now, so I'm not saying voting is minimal. Voting is good. Go vote. Everybody vote. It's important to vote. But if you think about civics and being engaged with your community and trying to make a difference on issues that you care about, digital media lets you do that well before you can vote. So like that Food Justice Project is somebody who's not 18 yet, who's not waiting to vote to make a difference, that team of students, in what they care about, because they could use digital media to do it even earlier. So if you think about that, trace that back to the teachers, that's a whole change in the curriculum of a government course. So part of it's technique the teachers have, but then part of it is what's the curriculum that you want to cover. How do you want to rethink government class so that people are kind of doing stuff, more active, more participatory, and not just learning about what to do later.
And you're folding the active writing, the process of writing into those projects.
All of those are writing projects. So if you're going to all those things like in the Food Justice Project, whether you're making a PowerPoint, whether you're building that website, there's the building of it, the kind of technical part, but you also have to write all the copy. You have to think about your audience. So the website for local people about where to find fresh food, they were the audience for it, not the teacher. They were, and so it had to be written in their language in such a way that they could understand it. Had to appeal to them. You want to get them to come to your website. So that's like audience and purpose and organization and structure. And have good references. They couldn't put stuff up on the web that was just, junk without actual citations. Where did they get the information? What if somebody's going to argue with them because they've gone public? I mean, this is out on the web, so they wanted to be credible. That's all writing now. That's what writing is.
What do you say to the traditionalist who's like, well, back at such and such school, we used to write a long paper about Shakespeare or something like that? I mean, I guess it's not either or, right?
Well, it's not either or. It's not either or. Absolutely. And for me, it's a little bit less whether it's a paper or it's a website, and it's a little bit more, are you writing something credible and something that you're passionate about, hopefully, that you've learned by writing, so that actually you feel like you've learned something by doing this, and you're sharing some knowledge you've created with other people who want to learn from you. So there's a lot of things, like in figure skating, you have your sort of, figure skaters have to do their requirements of technique in a way. So there's a lot of kind of writing assignments that people do that they hope you learn some capacity that you can then kind of more generally do. But in a way, it's writing, but it's not the real stuff. It's building up your skills and your muscles to really get involved with the real stuff. You'll learn a lot more by having an actual audience read your work and say something like, I have no freaking idea what you're talking about in that second paragraph. Oh, I better go back and redo that. I mean, that didn't come across so well. Or that kind of reaction to an audience tells you what you need to revise for, so that you can actually communicate with someone. So one of the things I love about digital technology is you can actually, encounter readers. Maybe people can actually also give each other feedback online on the way to something. Like if you use Google Docs, the way that you can keep revising and more people can read it, because you know what you mean. We all do this as writers. We know what we mean to say. We read our own paper. It makes sense to us. We knew what we were thinking. It's when somebody else who has no idea what we were talking about is going to read it, and then we see where all the holes are, and then we go back, we do another draft.
So I like that idea. I like all the positives that are the affordances of what digital brings to the writing process, and the audience, the accessed audience, is really, I think, perhaps one of the most important things.
Yeah.
So when I was talking to a bunch of teachers here and at other schools, and I was talking about digital media and writing, and how there are now these contexts where students and human beings in general can write. They can write on Facebook and Twitter and blogs. They can write posts or responses to different things. And they can write in different ways in a lot of different venues and a lot of different contexts, and kind of different self-weights involved there too. What a lot of the teachers said was there's more opportunity for writing and there is more writing, but they wondered about the depth of the writing in those contexts. And I was wondering, students, what you thought about that. A teacher who would say, I think that students are writing more, but they're writing thinner or kind of more surface and quick and fast, but not probing the thought processes or probing the depths. And I was wondering if you guys agreed.
I think it depends on whether, I know that sometimes if like a teacher gives, like you have to have this many pages, then I think it's a lot more likely for a student to go more for just getting to the end instead of actually going into it. Whereas if you're allowed to just do what you feel like doing instead of feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to get to 5 pages, then I feel like there's a higher likelihood that they'll go into it more because they'll be more focused on the subject matter itself instead of just getting to the end of the requirement.
I think also there's not necessarily an emphasis on lack of depth on the internet. There's more an emphasis on speed. Like the big thing is when you're on the internet, you want to get things quickly. And even when I'm online, I almost never read full articles. I just scan them when I'm reading about the news or something like that. So I'm not avoiding depth. I'm just going for speed. So I might lose some depth in that process, but the goal is not to lose depth.
I think also going off what Noah was saying was like we have to go quickly these days because we have so much other stuff going on that it's that sort of like get it done and move it on so that I can go on to the next thing which needs to be done by then. And so you do what's required, but it's very rare that you have time or the motivation to do more than what's required.
So you don't think that participation in the social networks, for instance, and the brevity that's sometimes required there, affects or infects your writing process, your thought process? You're not becoming kind of shallow because of that.
Well, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I feel like when you're sharing your work and like looking at other people's in such a like open public place, there's a lot more access to other people's ideas, like as you're writing. So I mean, it's easy not to like to kind of borrow other people's ideas or sort of like let your opinions be steered if you before you.
That was so true. That was amazing. She's really right. That's so right.
I mean, yeah. So it can be kind of tempting not to, like, to kind of go with what other people are saying if it's sort of in a group setting.
Like in Google Docs
Or like Edmodo. I feel like
yeah.
Online websites like Figment or something where you can share ideas and publish like stories on there. It's great because you can get the feedback back, but then also when you read so many other student and just like general people's stories from around the world, sometimes you get caught up in that, and instead of pushing your mind to farther reaches of imagination for a story, you kind of sometimes I'll find myself like fixating on a certain idea. I'll be like, oh, I really like that idea of fairies in Wonderland, and so I want to write another story about fairies in Wonderland instead of thinking about werewolves in Wonderland or something. I don't know.
I find that point really fascinating because I know that I was raised and taught in traditional schools, and it was like plagiarism, citation, everything like that. Don't borrow ideas, always attribute ideas. But at the same time, in the last 5 years or more, I found that as I increased my participation in the internet, sometimes I don't know where the ideas have come. Because I've read a Twitter feed, and I've read a blog or 15 blogs, and I've read a ton of emails. And sometimes I think, oh, I just came up with this cool idea, and it turns out like my friend has already thought of that or someone else. So it's really interesting.
I think it's an amplified. I love what you all were saying, by the way, but I think it's like an amplified example of a problem that's always existed. How to sort of like hold on to yourself and your vision at the same time that you're reading widely or participating widely. Like here at Berkeley, this would be a classic problem PhD students would have, for example. You spend years as a graduate student sort of trying to read everything on your topic. You can easily lose track of what you think and what you've read. You change your mind, hopefully, 1,000,000 times about what you think, because that's part of the learning process. If you still think the same thing that you thought when you came here as a grad student 4 years ago, then not much has happened to you in 4 years. So you're always sort of evolving your perspective based on these arguments you're having in your head with everybody else you're reading. And in a way, that's been the problem of growing up to become an educated person. You're interacting with so many minds and perspectives and visions, and it's hopefully affecting you, but you're also holding on to yourself at the same time. So that's like a hugely important skill, and I think the internet may have amplified that by making it so abundant and so easy to see all these different perspectives. But I don't think that's a new problem, and I think that actually learning to hold on to yourself in the middle of a socially networked world is a really important skill. And if you're developing that, and it's hard, and you're like aware of that, and you're trying to think about yourself in relationship to everything you're reading, that just makes you more amazing. I mean, that means that you're going to be, I would love students to be coming to this campus, for example, really able to deal with that abundance, but be clear and focused in their own thinking. That's like just becoming a great human being to me. So I love that you named that. I think it's a key internet skill, but a key kind of human problem too.
I have a couple more questions I want to throw out there. One of the things I've noticed, there's this guy, Henry Jenkins, who's talking about transmedia, and basically I've noticed that a lot more productions that people, evidence that, or essays that people are producing are really not a written essay. They might have components of a written essay, but they're actually this combination of digital text, a video, a blog post, a tweet that's been grabbed, you name your media, some SoundCloud information. So it's become this amalgam, this hybrid, which is totally fascinating and brilliant in some ways. And I wanted to ask a teacher how she felt about, like, what are those multimedia presentations that it seems as though kind of writing is going towards. How do you feel about that in thinking about teaching the essay as we know it, in the face of like this amalgam of digital texts that are kind of pushed together in hopefully a really intelligent way?
I don't know. I guess I feel torn a lot because I think it's all very tempting. I feel like in my own personal experiences as a teacher, when we introduce video cameras or different mediums, there's potential, but there's also always problems, and I think I get frustrated and give up fairly easily because time seems so scarce that you have with students. And something I was thinking about earlier on, I forget which particular point it was, but just that I think there's structural things in learning communities that encourage these kinds of explorations and projects, and then there's structural things that make them harder. And just little things like a schedule, like having 44-minute periods like we do, makes that kind of work harder, because in a class, if we're trying to bring a bunch of things together, it's over by the time we've figured it all, gotten through a couple glitches. I mean, I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced that. But at the same time, like, I'm remembering, Anya, your fabulous memory dreams. It was like amazing what you did last year. I will always remember that. It was beautiful, and you couldn't have done that without the technology, and it completely enhanced what you're doing. And I'm remembering certain films that students have made, which I love, but I think it brings in limitations with time. It also, I feel like there's a big barrier in terms of who's got access to stuff. Like, I'm still reluctant to require anything, which means that everyone's going home and using an electronic device, because in every class that I teach, there's some kids who don't, or one night the power goes out, or I don't know. So I feel mixed. I don't know that I answered your question.
I think that was a great answer. That's actually a perfect example of the kinds of things that teachers in Digital Is and other places need to talk through.
Right.
They're like the special things that teachers have to think about. So it's really easy for everybody to say, just do more with digital media, but there's a lot of practical things that have to be thought through. And one big thing that you mentioned, time. A lot of places are thinking about, do we need something like a genius hour every week, when it's just sort of like an open study for people to have more time to work on their projects. Or this Oakland project, those young people that did their senior capstones, that did like the food justice, and they all did a whole bunch of, all whatever their topics, but they started working on them starting as freshmen. So they might have actually written essays and blog posts about their topic. They did research and they got citations and they studied it, and they went out and they interviewed people, and it happened over the course of 4 years. Their topic might have changed or grown or shifted. So I wouldn't say that as freshmen people knew what they wanted to do for their senior project, but they did a lot of, was thinking of your question, Richard, about depth. They did a lot of groundwork to earn the right, the credibility, the authority to tweet and have that tweet point to something real. So, like, they didn't just tweet out with a link to a website that they hadn't investigated the credibility. And you wouldn't see it by that tweet. I mean, that tweet is 140 characters either way. But to me, that's another place where this question about whether something is superficial or not, or whether we should do traditional essays, or there's a lot of things we do to earn the authority to be an author. An author is someone who's going to take responsibility for what they put out in the world. Whether it's a film or a blog post or whatever, they're going to stand behind it. It's going to carry their name. And so the difference between tweeting something scandalous or tweeting out a website that really has wrong information, and there's a lot of that out there, especially about hot button issues like climate change or something like that, and tweeting out something that you've investigated the credibility, and you're a curator, and you're going to say, I've researched this issue, and I actually think this person has it right. Read them. Or here's my argument with that person. That's a different kind of tweet. That's a kind of academic tweet that scholars do, that Henry Jenkins would do. That's different than just kind of like passing things around. Both those things happen on the internet. That's not the internet's fault. That's up to the author, actually, and his or her sense of responsibility over their content.
Yeah, that brings up another. I have a bunch of topics that I wanted to get at, but one is that.
I know. I love Richard. Everybody's like, we got to catch the 4 o'clock bus, I think.
I know. Do you guys have questions?
Yeah, actually, I have one. So we were talking like a bit about earlier about like borrowing information online, and since it seems like now with internet and stuff, it seems harder to find what is borrowed and harder to just cite sources in general. Like if you're writing a research paper, which I am now, it's a lot of different kinds of sources and a lot of different ways to give that source credit. So I'm wondering, like, if you think like the MLA and APA or whatever styles are sort of effective structures to deal with citing things, and if we need to sort of change that technology.
That's a fabulous question, and actually they're even thinking about that at like APA and MLA in the scholarly community. So when I put my professor hat on, citation is of course huge, and really sourcing your material is important. And we would all agree as scholars that those structures are all being impacted by the internet, and they have not been able to keep up with internet culture. So even the professional associations, APA and MLA are professional associations, they have committees that are meeting to review all the time their structures for citation, and it feels like we can't keep up enough. So I think you're right that those kinds of structures, which you'll probably be required to use when you get to college, I'm sure you will, but they're evolving and they have to pick up the pace of evolving. The other thing is they were, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
No.
I was just going to say they were also created, it's created for much more stable things. Like they pointed to books and articles that once they were printed, they could get as, you know, time could pass, but it's the same book until there's a second edition, that kind of thing. But the first edition of something, the words don't change. It's still page 73 where you've got this quote. But an internet site or a blog, we can edit them. They change constantly. So all those citations also were invented for a time when information was more stable. So it's great. Now things can be updated more easily, but the citations, it's hard to keep up with that. So a lot of people are now doing things like putting a citation retrieved at this time, at this certain moment, from this certain link, to point you to the exact thing that you read, because by the time somebody reads your research paper, that site could have been revised.
Thanks.
Rebecca?
I was just thinking it's such a great question, Noah, and having today spent a lot of my day attempting to convince students, Darian had to endure this earlier today, to care about their citations and why it's important. And the thing I kept saying is the whole reason we're inflicting all of this on you is because maybe someone would want to learn more about what you're talking about. And that's like, I kept saying that is why you're doing it. That is your goal, is to be able to let someone find out more. And then I'm picturing reading like a blog, a scholarly blog, where they do it in a way that's so much more natural and easier and more interesting, which is that it's just linked right there, like you literally are there. And that, yes, we still want to be able to reference things that only exist in these static hard copy versions, but I know for my students, I would say of 3 classes right now working on research papers, we've got like 2 books probably out of a whole lot of students. You know, they could be linking within their texts, and it would achieve what I'm claiming this is about achieving so naturally and wonderfully in a way that actually would let people get where you want them to go.
It's fabulous, because then if you're not interested in following that link, you read right over it. It doesn't interrupt your reading. But if you are, in 1 second, boom, you can see it. Yeah, I agree.
Students,
What she said. Students, what she said.
Yeah.
But I'm not doing it. I'm making everyone do all these like the way we do it. No one actually does look at it. I don't go look up these things. Like it's just.
Don't tell them that.
It's just checking it all out because it's what you have to do.
It is changing, but you know, that would be a fascinating little research project to kind of talk to freshman comp instructors across, you know, a handful of places and say, what are you requiring for citation?
Right.
And everybody sort of wants to make sure that you can do it if it's required,
Right.
and it's still required in some, but it's changing bit by bit. It's changing.
It will change. I bet very soon it will be. I hope it will be different. It should be.
We have several more minutes. I wanted to open it up just in case you guys had more questions. I had one about voice and writing. In other words, people are transcribing In other words, they're using Google Voice to write, and I was wondering what the students thought about that, and actually anyone, Elyse and Rebecca also, in that if you don't put a pen to the paper, or if you don't write at the keyboard, then is it still writing? I guess it's thought, and just kind of things like that. But I want to hear some student questions also.
I don't think I've ever used that. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to me, it's kind of weird not to write something, say something for Google Voice, just like writing or typing it out. Because for me, I'm used to writing my thoughts out all the time, whether it's just for academics, my own personal thoughts, or just somebody else's thoughts. Whatever it is, I'm just used to writing. I can't just express it through voice. It has to be through either typing or writing.
Personally, I'm a lot better at writing out my thoughts or anything along that lines, because when I'm trying to tell a story out loud, generally I'll forget parts of it or have to pause and think of what comes next or sort through my thoughts, especially if I'm like making up on the spot. Whereas if I'm writing it, it just tends to flow better. So.
Yeah. It's normally those moments where you have to change what you have to think of one thing, you also have to think of another. It's really complicated when you're speaking out loud.
Right? It is.
I feel like if you're speaking out loud, it might be good in a way because it'll be a lot less filtered and more, I don't know, like you're on it, what you honestly think, less, like you can't really edit. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way, but also I think it can go both ways, because if you're talking about a controversial or kind of touchy subject, which is what a lot of writing can be about, and is a great thing about writing on the internet, is sharing your opinions about like current events or something like that. When you're talking, I feel like sometimes it doesn't always come across the way that we want it to, whereas in writing, you can really like fine-tune your words and your word choices and express what you actually want to say, whereas when I'm just talking, I don't really think about every little point, every little nuance that might come across in my conversation. So.
I also feel like, along Hannah's lines, when you write something and put it out there, I think you're a lot more, it's possible you'll be a lot more open, because if you receive criticism, it won't be right to your face, whereas even if you're just dictating something for the computer, I feel like there's something a lot more vulnerable in some ways about talking face to face, because you don't want that immediate critique. So
it's also like our culture is developing in that direction right now. Like people are texting more than they're talking, so people are more comfortable with talking to each other over words instead of like over text instead of over voice, even if that's still through a computer. Like if you're hearing someone's voice, like even over a video chat, like we're more used to just writing, texting, Facebook, whatever it is.
It adds in that third-party barrier, which sort of breaks things up, so it's not quite as personal.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. How much of even what would otherwise be face-to-face conversations now happening through our thumbs.
Well, there go the lights. It's time to actually move toward the buses, but Elyse, thank you very much. We just touched on a few things, and there are like a million things that we could be talking about. I have a whole list of questions, and I'm sure these guys will be thinking about stuff after this. But I think it was a really nice start, and we thank you for spending some time with us, getting us thinking about some of these things. Maybe it's for us to engage some part of your network with the National Writing Project and kind of get with those people and start cross-pollinating some of the ideas. And students, thanks a lot for spending some time with us on Friday and sharing your really cool ideas. And Rebecca Tucker-Smith, thank you very much.
Great to meet you all. Go catch that bus, though. Oh my gosh.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.